So welcome everybody to our show, and happy St. Valentine's to everybody. Part of what we do at Mural is to inspire imagination workers globally, and we do that with a lot of love, as you can see also from Chris's heart there. Again, and who better than Chris to share that knowledge, right? The LUMA's mission is to provide universal design literacy. So hi Chris, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Mariano. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
So last show, Chris shared the point of view behind LUMA system of design methods, shared why design and why they believe 1 billion people will be trained in LUMA sooner than later. And he claimed that, again, design is not a process, but it's a discipline that underpins any process. And he was using the example of Google's design sprint and how LUMA's methods enhance the process. You can watch that one again at mural.co/webinars, and I recommend it, especially for the folks that are trying to convince others on the power of design, but also the ones that want to understand why LUMA is important in today's business world. Towards the end of that show, people were remarkably interested in getting a little peek or fully inside LUMA's kitchen. And so I asked Chris if he could gather his cooks together and open up the kitchen a little more. So that's what we're going to be doing today. They're going to be live presenting a method, showing something that you can turn around in less than an hour and start doing yourselves. Today, tomorrow, and the day after, right? For hashtags, we'll be live tweeting hashtag remote design. And I'll shut up now. Chris, it's all you guys now.
Oh, great.
Oh, hey, by the way, sorry, one more thing. Folks that have questions, use the Q&A feature in the webinar software, and I'll queue them up and I'll grab the amazing team later for some Q&A.
Great. Well, hey, thanks for the introduction, Mariano. It's a pleasure to be back. And hello, everyone. So, yeah, as most of you know on the call today, people around the world have recognized the value design thinking brings to really multiple facets of business. And as a result, many are eager to find ways to integrate this practice into their culture so they can leverage it in their everyday work. And today's webinar is part 2 of a series about just that, using design thinking in your everyday work. And features a recipe for how to use design thinking to make something that looks like this. What you are looking at here is a visualization of a customer experience that a team created so they can better understand, what is working well with their service, where there's room for improvement and innovation, but also align on where the most promising opportunities for change lie. And the neat thing is that what you see here was cooked up by a team working remotely. So why did I choose this for today's webinar? Well, as many of you know, ensuring your customers have an incredible experience with your product or service is vital to business success. However, product and service experiences can be quite difficult for teams to wrap their head around and design for because, a customer's journey interfaces with so many facets of an organization. There is the interface to the actual product or service touch points, of course, but also customer care, your communications and branding, as well as back office functions like maintenance and operations. And the challenge is that people responsible for supporting the different parts of the customer experience often reside in different functional departments, different organizations sometimes, and certainly different geographic locations. But they nonetheless need to come together and collaborate to ensure that their collective design decisions form a cohesive and positive customer experience. So the recipe I want to share today helps to break down those organizational and geographic barriers and get your design orchestra in tune. Now, as Mariano mentioned, he and I thought it would be a great idea if we could conduct today's webinar in the style of a cooking show. So we'll see how this goes. So what I'm going to do is take you through a step-by-step process and basically demonstrate how using a few methods from the LUMA system of innovation, in this case, we'll say 1.5 pounds of experience diagramming, a 16-ounce box of Visualize the Vote, a few statement starters, and a teaspoon of rose thorn bud. You and a diverse team of internal stakeholders can, pardon the pun, slice and dice your field research into a delectable experience diagram, like I just showed you. One that is full of insights that you and a remote team can have good conversations around to basically figure out where you should be taking your product or your service next, okay? Now, before we dig in, let me provide a bit more context for what we're going to cook up here and where you might use this in your own work. First, as Mariano mentioned already, if you know anything about LUMA, you know that our belief is that when people are attempting to design and innovate, while they will certainly employ a creative process and that these creative frameworks are important, we don't think design can be summed up in a one-size-fits-all process. We teach the LUMA system of innovation, pictured here, which is comprised of 36 essential design methods that you can employ in a multitude of combinations and ways to tackle the day-to-day challenges your teams are faced with when innovating. There are methods for looking, that is observing human experience, methods for helping teams understand and analyze data or situation, as well as methods for making, or what we mean there is envisioning the future. Again, these methods are not taught as a process, but as a discipline, a set of elemental, essential methods that underpin and support all kinds of creative processes. And so, given the fact that we have a lot of people on the call today from different organizations from all around the world, I thought I'd quickly put into context that the recipe we are going to show you today is really perfect for the early phases of your creative process. For example, you may work for a company that employs a stage gate approach like this one represented here. The recipe we're going to share is perfect for your stage 0 or discovery phase, okay? Or you might work for a company that uses Google Design Sprint in your work. Again, the recipe we're going to share is perfect for the work you might do in the understanding phase or the understand phase here. Or perhaps you work for an organization that has adopted the very popular design thinking process from the Stanford D School. Again, the recipe we're going to share fits nicely when you and your team are trying to make sense of your research and defining insights and opportunities, okay? So now let's shift gears a bit and provide some context about the actual recipe demonstration we're going to do today. First, I'd like to introduce you to my fellow cooks today. You'll see them in the flesh later. Ali Reilly, Laura Vincezi, and Ryan Nee. They are members of our amazing design team here at LUMA and have been working feverishly in our design kitchen this morning preparing today's recipe. Okay. And the scenario is this. Ali, Laura, and Ryan work for a bike sharing startup that recently launched a handful of their public bicycle sharing systems in select cities. To better understand how people are using their system, the team has, we'll say, just returned from conducting some field research consisting of a series of contextual inquiries with users. And now they want to, as I mentioned before, figure out where they should be taking their product or service next by making sense of their research and pinpointing what opportunities for innovation and improvement would bring the most value to their users and the organizations. So this is the recipe that we're going to do today. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually go to Luma Workplace and log in. Now, you don't need Luma Workplace to employ this recipe. I'm going here because Luma Workplace is where, among other things, our users can find all kinds of recipes. And we have a special collection of recipes centered around helping remote teams apply human-centered design effectively. If I scroll down, oh, here it is. We have another special section of recipes. Users can launch directly into Mural. And if I scroll down a bit more, oh, here it is. Here is our recipe. So pinpoint impactful opportunities within a customer journey. If I click on that recipe, it opens up and I can view a bunch of things here. I can view the step-by-step instructions, some supporting video content for how to do this with a remote team. But there's actually no need to review this content here because we're going to show you how to make this dish on our cooking show today. So to begin, the first thing I'm going to do is click on this button here, Use Remotely. And that will open up a Mural template. Okay. All right. If you're not familiar with what a Mural template is, and Mariano, correct me if I don't articulate this correctly, it's really a way to set up a mural ahead of time. This template was created by Ryan specifically for any team that wants to employ this recipe in their work. It contains really all the things the team will need to collaborate to do this recipe. So recalling the 4-method recipe, here you'll see an experience mapping template. Let me just zoom up on that a little bit here. Okay. Followed by some rose, thorn, bud stickies, then some index cards for coming up with some statement starters, and finally some instructions for how to use the voting tool in Mural, which they built into a system to conduct the last method, visualize the vote. So, but don't worry, we're going to walk you through each of these methods in a bit more detail. So to get started, we'll click this button here to create the mural, and then invite the team to it. And that's pretty simple. Once you've created Mural, and you can just go up here and we'll say Ali and Ryan and Laura, and then I'll send invites out to those folks and they can join, okay? Now, so what I just did, through the magic of Mural and internet technology, is transform that template into an actual virtual room, a mural, and invite the team to it. Now, you may be wondering what these colored circles are. I've got some down here, so forth. The small red circles here are just to orient everyone on what the key steps of the process are. So what to do first, second, and so on. Okay. The larger magenta dots are prep cues for the remote facilitator. So for example, this one here instructs me to change the title so I can be more specific about the topic or goal of the session. So let's call this one Bico Rental Experience. Okay, all right, so stuff like that. And the yellow dots are some top tips for all the participants doing each exercise. So for example, if we zoom into this one, you know, when the team's doing their rose, thorn, bud, it's just a tip to say, place these notes on top of the actual experience diagram, things like that. So with the kitchen prepared, let's start cooking, okay? So as they do on cooking shows, I'm going to fast forward in time. What you see here is Ali Laura and Ryan, having been invited to the mural, working on their experience diagram. Okay. For those on the call not familiar with this method, experience diagramming is a way of mapping a person's journey through a set of circumstances or tasks, also known as journey mapping. These diagrams can take many forms, but the most common is that of a matrix, which you see here. The horizontal axis here it represents time, usually. In this case, we've added some columns along this dimension that helps teams call out what they think are the key steps and corresponding substeps of the experience. And the vertical axis, which in this case serves as swim lanes, that more often than not are meant to call out different characteristics of each step. So in this case, the team thought it important to call out 3 characteristics of each step in the experience. This top swim lane here is meant to call out who is involved in each step of the experience. For this example, this is anyone the primary user is interacting with. And as you can see, the user, if I zoom out here, in this scenario, doesn't interact with anybody until later on the experience, which in this case was because he ran into a problem he had with customer support. The second swim lane here is meant to call out where this step took place and really serves as a good indicator of when there was a shift in environment during the experience. Again, things like noise, light conditions, weather, and privacy are important to consider when, because these things can heavily influence the quality of the interaction. For example, in this research, one of the things the teams noted that due to the frigid weather that day, the user was wearing gloves. But when he went outside to rent and unlock his bike, he had to remove them in order to interact with the very small buttons and on the phone and the bike interface. And lastly, this third swim lane here is meant to call out what things people used or interacted with in order to complete each step in the experience. Good. So if I zoom out here, what you'll see the team doing is placing screenshots and animated GIFs from a contextual inquiry video, which is running off screen in another application. Okay. And they're using these snippets from their research to highlight what they found to be significant frames from their observations. And really what they're trying to do is build a cogent artifact that succinctly represents what they observed, and so forth. So now what I'm going to do is fast forward in time again and switch to a new tab, okay, and show you what their finished experience diagram looks like. All right, so that's the final, or what they're working on now. And to me, things like this are beautiful and highly useful. Now, it will take a team of 2 to 4 people about 2 hours to complete just this step. You can see that all the key steps and sub-steps have been identified and organized visually. We can see that there are 6 key steps in the experience, and that each step is described with sufficient detail. Okay. And I love how they dropped in animated GIFs from the actual contextual inquiry footage. It really helps to further illustrate what actually happened. This one here, there was an error that came up on the bike interface, and this is the actual error in happening from their contextual research. So really like that added feature there. I just want to pause at this point to make a quick remark. Often working remotely through digital means like this is seen as inferior to doing it in person. What I really like about this recipe is that it leverages an already powerful method, experience diagramming, experience mapping. Jim Callback, who I know is on the call, has written a great book about it. A powerful method in a way that you can't leverage if your team were working in person on physical whiteboards. Environments like Mural actually, for me, open up possibilities and make it way easier and faster to not only translate, in this case, hours of detailed contextual video data into a succinct, information-rich artifact, but also share this information-rich artifact with key stakeholders anywhere and anytime in order to have more productive conversations about how people are experiencing your particular product or service. So, speaking of conversations, the next step in the recipe is to facilitate dialogue amongst the team about their observations. And one of the most beloved methods from our system for doing that is a method called Rose, Thorn, Bud. So let me go forward in time once again to show you that. And so now what you see here, a little later on in the process, is Allie, Laura, and Ryan using Rose, Thorn, Bud to essentially annotate their experience diagram by identifying what was positive, what was negative, and what was promising about each step of the experience. What they have done and are doing here is combing through each step and dragging over these colored sticky notes and jotting down their opinions about what transpired at each step. So, for example, wherever you see a pink sticky note, that's a rose. It's someone pointing out that what went well. For example, let me zoom into here. Okay. So, for example, in this step of the experience, Allie noted that the user had gone to the rack only once and not found a bike. And they just noting that there always seems to be ample supply of bikes. And that's a rose. Now, wherever you see a blue sticky note, that's a thorn. It's someone highlighting a breakpoint in the experience or a potential problem. For example, in this same part of the experience, Ryan noted that the user had some issues with the style of the bicycle. Right. And wherever you see a green sticky note, that's a bud. A bud is something where someone is highlighting an idea or something that may have the potential to be exploited. For example, again, in the same portion of the experience, Laura noted that it might be worth exploring a design where the user could reserve a bike prior to using the kiosk. Okay. Now, this method takes about an hour, and what I like about it is that it provides an efficient means for everyone to get their thinking and opinions out on the table while simultaneously organizing them because they are placing each comment in relation to the portion of the experience it pertains to. Okay, let me just zoom out here a little bit. Sorry, I'm having trouble driving. There we go. Okay. So I think it's very powerful when you combine these two methods. Okay, now, once the team has exhausted their rose, thorns, and buds, can you guys hear me? Still? Yeah? Okay, sorry. Once the team has exhausted their rose, thorn, and buds, again, in the recipe, that'll take about an hour, it's time to proceed to the next step of the recipe, and that is to begin defining insights and opportunities for change. So let me go ahead and go there. This recipe employs another very popular design method we call statement starters. I've also heard them referred to as how might we statements. Whoops. Here we go. Okay. Statement starters, if you're not familiar with them, are an approach to phrasing problem or opportunity statements really in a way that invites exploration and is really an excellent method to employ when like we have here, you and a team of people are trying to translate your research learnings into actionable next steps. So again, what you see here is Allie. Let me zoom up just a wee bit here, using this tool here. Okay, so what you see here is Allie, Laura, and Ryan using this method. Each person is dragging over these white index cards here and attempting to really transform the learnings or synthesize the learnings and key stages of the experience into possible problem or opportunity statements the team might go and tackle. For example, let's zoom into, let's see, where are we at here? This cluster maybe? Let's see, we got here. Maybe this one here. Yeah, I like this one here. This is interesting. So for example, based on the feedback and discussion around this, if you look, rather thorny part of the experience, which involves interacting with the technology on the bike, we see that one member of the team has put forth the following challenge. They're like, hey, we're having trouble here. How might we not need an interface on the bike at all? So interesting characterization based on the feedback. And that's the point of that transition of, oh, well, if this is something we decide to do, how would we do that? And thus a design sprint could ensue to go and try to tackle and improve that part of the process. Okay. And finally, let's fast forward in time once more. And that takes us to our final step, really what we showed at the beginning of today's webinar. And that is really a series of layered artifacts. There's an experience diagram, and on top of that, there's some rose thorn buds and statement starters, which, when combined, not only help the team codify their research, but also really help to shape their conversation and actually document the decisions they made along the way. But there's one more decision to make in an exercise like this and for this recipe, and that is, well, what should the team focus on? As you all well know, opportunities for improvement typically outweigh the resources and means to do them all at the present time. So you need to prioritize and focus. Now, to be clear, a team should never decide on a direction based on the documentation and discussion around one user experience, which is what we're showing here. Okay, so you need to imagine that the team has actually documented and discussed several of these actual user scenarios. Okay, but there's not time to show all those. So you imagine doing these for every contextual inquiry they conducted. Okay, now there are some great methods in our system of innovation for prioritizing. This recipe employs a very simple but I think deceivingly powerful method called visualize the vote. If we zoom up here, let's see here, okay. To the area of the mural, you'll note that Mural has a built-in voting feature for just such an occasion. In fact, that's the tip there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom back out, try to get this the right level. And I'm going to ask the team here in a bit to vote on, assuming we've discussed this, right? There's always conversation around these, to say, okay, we got to make a call here. We can't do all these things. What do we think is most impactful? What do we think if we should do next, okay? In order to increase whatever it may be, customer value, shareholder value, whatever it may be. Okay, and to do that in Mural, they've got this great little tool up here. It's this little voting icon here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that, and there's a little thing that says Start Voting Session. Okay, and what pops up is we can name the session. So maybe I'll call this what we should do next, or whatever you want to say, or the most impactful projects we could take on. And in this particular case, I'm going to hand out 3 votes to all of us. So there'll be 12 instances to vote. And the way I like to think about it is each one of those votes is worth money, right? It's like, before you place that vote, imagine you got $50,000 or $10,000, $100,000 in your hand. Where are we going to place our bets? Where should we spend our precious resources? Of all the things we can improve about the system, where should we go next? Okay. And when I hit start here, what's going to happen is those are going to be distributed to all 4 people. And I can actually watch that. And what's neat about it is they've gone away. I like the fact that Mural hides the voting here, which hacks the tendency for people to follow the leader. And so everybody's voting on their own. And typically, you would have some discussion about this. I would say, hey, think about where these votes should go. And in only a few minutes, you can see now everybody's voting. And I'll place one here, one there, and one there. Okay, just to kind of fish. And then once everybody's voted, I can go over here and click End Voting Session. And another neat feature is that what it does is it pulls to the front where the votes landed. So you recall, I mean, if you look through the screen here, you'll see there are something like almost 24 opportunities. And some of them are similar, but the ones that got the most votes are the ones we might now have further discussion around, saying, yeah, maybe this is something we should, possibly build some concept maps around, or go back to leadership and say, hey, based on our research, these are the opportunities we think are best suited to make major improvements to the system. So, and really, that is it. That's our recipe for pinpointing impactful opportunities. Let me zoom up on this, just to kind of give you a little bit of a reminder, within a customer journey. With, in this case, a remote team. Of course, you can do this in the flesh, but this is specifically designed for doing this with a remote team. Again, about 4 hours in total. And again, a great recipe for the early stages of your design and development arc. And with that, Ali, Laura, Ryan, I would like to thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mariano, to entertain any questions that you or the audience here has today. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to pull these headphones off, and I'm going to pull my team over, and we're going to sit and answer any questions you may have. So give me a minute to do that. Okay.
So congratulations on an excellent demo. You become a master of this thing.
That was the first time.
There you go. I mean, nice panning around, zooming. We had a little hiccups with the connections there, but that's on us. So, okay. So on that note, again, a lot of people asking how to start. Some folks starting Mural trials and LUMA Workplace trials. We've shared in the chat the link to the recipe in LUMA Workplace. And again, one of the questions, the first one is like, what's the relationship between LUMA and Mural? Right? And as I introduced in the beginning, we are, again, with similar missions, right? They provide universal design literacy is what LUMA does, and they have like an amazing curriculum, live workshops, trainer program, and so forth for large firms, but also have lumaworkplace.com for the billion people out there that should be there, right? So like, tell us a little more about what's the vision of LUMA Workplace, Chris.
Sure. I'm going to let Ryan take that. Ryan, these guys work fiercely.
I think that, one more thing, please speak louder because you're further away from the microphone.
Sure. I'm going to let these guys take the vision for LUMA Workplace, because these are the folks that work on it every day and know it better than I ever could.
I think the biggest thing is we really believe in the power of using design thinking or human-centered design methods. And we definitely see a barrier to people being able to use them effectively in their work. So the recipe that you just saw is a really good go-to recipe that can help teams solve problems. And so rather than having every team around the world have to figure out how to string methods together and use the right things and how long should each thing take, what we're trying to do is reduce all that and just give you stuff that you can use straight away, that you don't necessarily have to be an expert in everything, but that you can still get good outcomes.
Yeah, we want to get you focused on the work.
Yeah.
Right, and take away like the guesswork and what's the best way to approach this. And so it's really about that. Because what matters is, did you guys innovate or not? Did you come up with a great solution? So we're really there to support that. I think it's a great thing to say.
Yeah, I think Chris covered this a little bit earlier, but no matter what process you're working in or what methods or tools you're most comfortable with, maybe you say customer journey mapping, and maybe that's what people are familiar with. We hope that these tools, and especially with the Mural frameworks and templates, that they can be familiar to you and your teammates, so you can kind of, as they were saying, just get in and get to work right away.
Thank you. Guys, also, Jennifer speaking a little louder for the next reply.
Okay.
Something up here from Chris Adams. He's asking, what do you guys do when there's a LUMA relationship with a large firm? Do people get access to LUMA Workplace, or they need to go and create accounts individually?
Oh, maybe I'll take that one. The business.
And again, I insist on speaking.
Yeah, I'll take that one. It's a bit of a business question. So typically, when a large corporation engages us, we start off small, piloting different programs. We of course do in-person workshops and certification programs, and LUMA Workplace here is one component of our overall offering. Typically, it starts off as a team or two will buy access to it, but then if the company decides, you know, we need to be design literate across the organization, we need to bring these practices across the organization, we have enterprise-wide agreements. So with actually several companies right now where something like 90,000 or 400,000 people actually have access to the program. So, but typically companies don't come in and just ask for that up front. They kind of check it out, put the tires on it, and then graduate to that. Yeah?
Yep.
I got that right. Is that loud enough?
Ask your folks in digital transformation, design, human resources to get LUMA for everybody. So you shared, I mean, a great recipe. Again, mostly focused on the early stages. What are other methods in design thinking or the sprint or other methods that are really good to be done virtually? And which ones do you recommend to be in person?
That's a good question. Yeah.
I think almost anything, if you look at the intent of the method, rather than like the physical artifacts that are created, I feel like pretty much any method can be used remotely. It is a challenge, however. So a lot of the things that we've put on LUMA Workplace are trying to kind of overcome that challenge. But I think things like problem tree analysis, where you're sort of talking about the causes and effects of problems, can be really effective remotely. Abstraction laddering, which is sort of similar, talking about why something is a problem and how it is a problem, or why something is an opportunity and how it's an opportunity. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think another great recipe or set of methods to use remotely or use in a mural is capturing your interview notes. And so what we've been experimenting with is conducting a series of interviews, maybe talking to 3 or 5 people across a few days, or maybe on a Friday, and documenting all of our interview notes in a mural, and then translating them to roses, thorns, and buds, as you saw in the recipe that we did today. So that's a really great way for us to, as a group, reflect on what we heard in those interviews. And then what we've also been working on, capturing some notes in the same mural based on themes or behaviors that we might pull into our persona profiles about the people that we serve, and then also translating into those statement starters, or how might we statements based on each interview. So I think that's been something we've been experimenting with that works really well, whether you're all in one room using a mural or you have a remote team all around the world.
Yeah, there are some ethnographic research methods where you might think something like fly on the wall observation or contextual inquiry Those may be methods that are best performed in person, so that you can really gather the sort of nuances and subtleties that those methods yield in person. But even so, with web technologies and some of the kind of interview web tools that we've been using, it's not impossible to do those things remotely. So there's a lot of flexibility.
Yeah. I think
and I like that recipe in particular. It shows that again, the methods are not just for creating new products and services, right? I mean, diffuse tension or disagreement with a coworker is a great exercise to do. And it's all about visualizing the conversation versus just talking, right?
Yeah, that's important to note that part of the innovation process, you go through all these things. It's not just, hey, we'll come up with some ideas. No, we have tension, disagreement with coworkers, as much as I love them here on Valentine's Day. And we use these tools to have better dialogue with each other to get to the hard parts. Innovation's hard if you're really doing it. And these methods help us converse better and make faster progress.
All right.
Asynchronous is definitely a challenge. I think in general, live can be ideal, but there are certain methods that you could use, like round robin comes to mind, which is essentially an activity where people are handing things off to one another to critique and iterate on. And so with a team that's scattered around the world, you potentially could actually do that by handing it off to different people in different time zones. So I think, there definitely are ways to get around it. Our team happens to be located, our small team that makes LUMA Workplace happens to be in Nigeria and Ireland and Colombia and Pittsburgh and a bunch of different places. So we definitely faced that issue. But we try to get together live as much as we can in Mural, and then, trying to sort of get clever about how you can build and iterate on a prototype by actually having people doing it overnight while some people are sleeping. So I think the iterative nature of these methods and this methodology definitely supports the notion that people could be doing it asynchronously.
Yeah, something that we recommend is, again, using the flipped classroom from modern education approach to the flipped workshop. So everybody coming into a live session should be respectful for the rest of the people and, again, learn, watch the videos, get up to speed before getting to the live session so that we don't lose time catching up or what was that and so forth. So that's another thing that can be done so that we can maximize our together time that is scarce when you have a remote team.
Yeah, we're actively experimenting with that right now.
Yeah, and in that regard, there's I want to take two for sure. One is around rookies, and the other one is around LUMA for sales. So on the rookies front, any recommendations when there's different levels of expertise in the room? And I start with that. Make sure that you send them an activity before the live session so they can get familiar with the tooling, both the video, audio, Mural, or whatever you're using, so that, again, when someone uses, in a case, our software for 5-10 minutes, they're all done. They can master, right, like Chris right now, but again, they can get enough to be dangerous. But have them go in advance. If not, people start moving stuff around and fooling around for a little bit. But talking in particular about you guys, any ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you had a good recommendation of making sure that people are familiar with the methods that you'll be using. And I think starting off with something simple like Rose Thorn Bud that we did in the recipe today could be a good place to start. And so if you can see this recipe here, a good place to start might be to just do a retrospective about a recent project. So bring the group of people together. Maybe if you're on Workplace, you could share some information about Rose Thorn Bud ahead of time if they're not familiar with the method. Or you could also encourage them to sign up for a trial of Mural, or maybe you have a Mural account to be able to kind of get comfortable with working in the workspace as well. So this recipe could be a good place to start. It's a nice, simple way to find themes across a project that you just worked on and find ways that your next project could be better.
Another way to think about that question is just, there's a couple of tips that you might consider. One is to designate facilitators. Like if you're running a session where you know you're going to have a mixed collection of people with various expertise levels, you can designate a couple facilitators to make sure that they're on hand to offer help to people who are newer to it. And another tip might be to avoid using jargony terms and to just use very plain language and not maybe intimidate people with terminology like even design thinking or human-centered design. And you can just use terms like these are structured activities that help us work more efficiently and to service better conversation.
Yeah, like for example, the recipe that's up on screen is rose, thorn, bud, and affinity clustering. But if I was actually using that with people, I would say, okay, guys, what we're going to do is spend some time talking about what went well on the project, what didn't go well, and what areas of opportunity there were. And then we'll take all those things and group similar ones together. So you're describing it more in plain English, despite there being this underlying methodology. I think that's really important because people are a little weary of new techniques and new methods. And if you just introduce it in plain English rather than in jargon, it really helps to sort of reduce people's sort of gut reaction to like that aversion to new things.
Yeah, I like how you guys present, again, quickly reflect on past project, instead of, again, retrospective or I mean, it's very colloquial and I like that. So, design thinking for sales. So 1 out of 9 professionals in the US are in sales. Did you know that?
Nope.
I didn't know that.
I do now.
And the other thing is like, we are all in a way in sales, right? We're all to convince people and so forth. So any single of these methods can be used to convince people, right? To get funding, to again, hire someone and so forth. But in particular for sales or pre-sales, what have you guys seen being used out there?
Yeah, if you guys don't mind.
I want to see what you guys.
Go for it, Chris.
I love this question. Look, 1 out of 9 people are in sales. What most organizations, particularly large organizations, don't leverage is the fact that these people are, if they're good salespeople, tend not to be in the audience, or tend not to be in the office. Or if they are there, they are in constant communication with customers of all types. And to me, my salespeople are sensors in the world. And I want them equipped using human-centered design as much as possible. Because anytime you can have a face-to-face or a phone call or something with an actual buyer or customer is a chance to learn. So for example, what would be good for salespeople? This ethnographic research stuff up here. Interviewing, on the wall, even conducting contextual inquiry. When they go on site visits or you're there in your customers' offices, think like a researcher. What are you there to learn? Yeah, you're there to sell, but what's the #1 advice for all salespeople? Listen first, right? Learn. Okay, don't go in saying, hey, this is what I got to sell. Understand the pain points of your customers. And so I want to focus on this ethnographic research area, and all of these here are very important. And look, everybody's been interviewed or done an interview, but don't underestimate what it takes to do this well. And when you do it well, what kinds of insights it can yield. So it's a very simple method or technique along with the other ones here, but strongly recommended for sales. The other area which we were going to zero in here is design rationale. Dick Buchanan, one of my old bosses at Carnegie Mellon, I think he's at Case Western now, design was rhetoric, it was rhetorical. It's about making arguments. It's about communication, it's about convincing. And yeah, some of these design rationale methods are about selling concepts, but it's really about the art of persuasion. It's really about saying, you know, hey, based on what I know about you and based on what we're trying to do, here's a way that I could present this or look at this that might give you deeper insights into why we are thinking about going this way or why we might purchase this and so forth. So there are 2 things there. Do you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, one other category that came to mind is participatory research. So, for example, you could come into an organization, you could just start selling like crazy, or you could take a moment to set up sort of a structured activity where you actually are kind of covertly interviewing the client. So, you know, you could set up a what's on your radar to kind of take their temperature about what sort of makes them nervous in the domain that you're talking about, or what keeps them up at night. And then your sales pitch is based on that rather than based on nothing. So I think that there are a lot of things in the participatory research methods here, especially what's on your radar and buy a feature. So this is, imagine you made a bunch of features, potential features and existing features of your product, priced all of them, and had people actually have to purchase these paper features. You have a really good sense of what matters to people, which is ultimately what, you know, how your sales pitch is framed.
Yeah, and those two activities in particular lend themselves really well to doing remotely. And you'll see on Luma Workplace, we have some templates set up for doing those activities, what's on your radar and buy a feature.
Yeah, again, and as we saw, like sales is a lot about learning, listening, and sometimes you just can't listen. You need to co-create so that you expose the things visually, because the customer might not be realizing that they have a problem. So again, anything related to same experience mapping or basically the exercise that you showed today. Again, for solution selling, what you've done today is basically the first step.
Absolutely. Again, if you're selling products and services that are already in the world, right, pre-baked, definitely a lot of learning and feedback you give to the development team, or for articulating your argument about what does exist in your product portfolio. But particularly in consulting sales solutions, where you're selling a bespoke solution, I don't think there's a method up here that couldn't be employed to fundamentally figure out what the pain points are and help pre-sale how you can go about the problem. You can go into your customer and saying, you know, we spent some time talking with you and talking with some of the customers, and here's our view on this is what we're seeing. My gosh, what a way to make a connection and say, hey, we're ready to work with you to go after and solve the problem. So great stuff there. I think.
Yeah, and again, our sales guys, I know they do a lot of stakeholder mapping. Again, because it's a network of a system of people in the company you're selling to. So that's a very relevant one. So it seems like we can do like another themed webinar on this topic, guys.
Yes.
So we are almost done. So unfortunately, no more questions, but we're here, right? I mean, we're here. We continue to be here. LumaWorkplace.com. There's a lot of videos for you to share with your teams also and turn around and do them. Of course, Luma's working on helping large firms transform how they work. They have some great case studies in their website, Genpact, Autodesk, and so forth. We might bring one of them to share their story also soon. And again, you can always access them on info@luma-workspace.com, and all these guys today are on social media, looking at what we are saying and so forth. The webinar will be recorded so you can share with the rest of the world. And if you want to check more great stuff, stay tuned to @Mural on Twitter, @Luma Institute, right? On Twitter for you guys?
Yes.
And again, we'll keep on doing more of these, so spread the word, stay tuned, and see you next time. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for all the cooking, guys, and let's keep on using this analogy.
Okay, a lot of fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Happy Valentine's Day. Bye-bye.